Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Now it gets serious.
Yep. So I guess we should start with when did you know you wanted to become a writer?
Oh, well, actually, no, I wanted to become a writer. No, I never took it seriously. I started writing, I started creative writing in high school.
Hmm.
Um, Never thought of it as a career. Still, in fact, still don't. Um, but that doesn't mean I won't keep trying. But I would say an interesting thing happened when I was working on a television series um, on a weekly basis, and suddenly I started hearing these characters that I was working with every week when we worked together for several months, and I realized that I I could hear their language, the character's language, and their pattern, their rhythm. And I wrote a couple of really, really bad spec screenplays for the or teleplays for that series. But that kind of got me started. It was just taking a leap. They really were bad, but I did at least dip my toe in to that idea of writing down. I seriously putting form to stories. Yeah. So that was probably 25 years ago.
Oh, wow. And where did you write your Twyla and the WarBirds series?
Physically aware or over the, uh, I mean, it took me 12 years to write it because I was working full time. I was moonlighting as a novelist, I guess, a full time cinematographer. So, which is actually more than full time. So it would be mornings, evenings, weekends, turn my back on a lot of family and friends for a long time to try to stuff in the time it takes. And because it was my first, at the time, it was my first novel. So I didn't know what I was doing. Writing prose is completely a different world from writing screenplays. Screenplays is a form of a very high form of torture that is not natural in any way. In any way, um, and I have many issues with it, but none of it crosses over into writing prose as a novelist. So I had a steep learning curve, but I didn't give up.
Never give up. And
Yeah.
get into cinematography. Did you always want to do that as a career?
Not always. No, when I finally brightened up a little bit right at the end of high school, and realized there were jobs for artists and designers in movies. And I could always draw. And so um, I thought I wanted to be a conceptual designer or a storyboard artist or that kind of thing. So I went to art school in Oakland, California, studied drawing and filmmaking. Um, and the great thing about that school was you could get your hands immediately on the equipment and just go out and just make all the worst stuff possible and learn so much. I mean, I did animation, 3D animation, stop motion animation. I did live action, and I really liked that form of storytelling a lot. So being on set and actually creating story with your hands, that started to become so much more exciting than the idea of sitting at my drafting table and making drawings. So after I got into my first television series with just pure stubbornness and luck, I watched the cinematographer on the set and I was just amazed. I thought, there's an actual magician. That guy can actually make magic. He understands how to reduce the world to two dimensions, which is what television and film does. How to speak that language quickly. He knows how to light. He knows how to take away light. He knows how to direct all these people and with all this crazy sounding language and equipment. And that really kind of blew my mind. And that sort of was set the spark for me. I thought, okay, well, I definitely want to be in that world. And so I worked a long time in local television and tried to learn what I didn't learn in college, the practical problem solving, because almost everything is problem solving. The creative part is hard to come by because that takes time and money. The actual, just basic problem solving, you still that's the foundation. You got to start there. So anyway, I was bitten with the bug there and worked my way into Hollywood as a camera operator for a long time and got to work between great, great and not so great writing and great and not so great directors, and work for some great cinematographers and really learn the craft. And it's a very specific language. It doesn't really translate into anything else, especially in television. I ended up doing a lot of television series. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I did meander. I
Yeah.
gave you a full-throated meander.
And what was your first cinematographer project that you worked on? What was your first film?
Oh, wow. Um, as a cinematographer, I did the final season of the Showtime series called Californication.
Mhm.
Uh, yeah, um, yeah, very crass series, but a lot of fun. Adults behaving badly is often very funny. Often, not always. And then I got lucky and got right into a new series, which was the half-hour comedy of the movie about a boy. And we shot 2 seasons of that, and that was such a joy to actually go to work and laugh
Mhm.
um, with very funny people and very good-hearted people. It was pretty remarkable. It's hard to come by that in Hollywood. That the people are also good-hearted. There's a lot of tension usually, but in that case, there wasn't. It was just a joy. Wonderful cast and writers, and we laughed a lot. And that was weird. I was going to work and didn't feel like work. It was, I'm going to go hang out with really good people and my friends and my talented technicians, and we're going to make a funny show. And my goodness, it was wonderful.
And when you were writing Twyla and the WarBirds, what inspired that story?
Twyla and the WarBirds came from my research into the women's Air Force service pilots of World War II, the ferry pilots who really just wanted to contribute to the war effort, like most people did back then. Um, they wanted to put their skills to use. They wanted to have a meaningful contribution to the war, and it made sense if you were sending all the trained male pilots off to the front lines. Well, then who was going to fly the planes from the factories where they were built out to the air bases scattered all over the country? Who was going to test fly them after they were repaired? Who was going to tow banner targets for artillery gunner practice? There were so many projects that needed pilots to fly planes, and it just made sense. And of course, the military, not so forward thinking, really resisted it. But two women, Nancy Love and Jackie Cochran, had such high reputations in aviation that they were able to convince General Arnold and General I think it was maybe Olds, um, and they couldn't deny the fact that they did need more pilots and they needed them for this sort of domestic um, effort that was really quite extensive. The Lend-Lease deal that Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin all agreed on was really designed to kind of keep us out of Russia. But here you go. In the meantime, you can have a ton of supplies to help you fight the bad guys. But we really don't want to get nobody in their right mind would want to go to Russia. So so the problem was that as I'm researching this and finding out all about these wonderful women pilots, there are the Russian female pilots, and they're not ferry pilots. There were also the Royal Air Force, the ladies pilots that were transport pilots. But the Russian pilots also had a very famous aviator. She was so famous that she could talk the military into letting her form three female combat squadrons, fighter, ground attack, and bomber squadrons. That's pretty famous. But that's also one of those things, one of those ideas that becomes possible when your country is invaded. Suddenly, those conventions you thought were so important about repressing people and genders, suddenly not so important when your country's being invaded. So yeah, why don't you go put your life on the line as well? Suddenly that's okay. All right, so here's my problem. I've got these American women with this great story, and I've got these Russian women with a mind-blowing first in history where they're fighting in the air, on the ground, or I should say in the air at altitude and at low level, and as bomber pilots against the best combat air force, most experienced on the planet. There's a major problem with this idea. Okay. No one in the West cares about Russian history. No one does. You can't pitch that story. No one's going to say, yeah, that sounds great. So I had to figure out a way, in the context of historical fiction, a believable way to get a Yankee in Stalin's court. How do I do that? Oh, it turns out we were delivering so much material to them. One of the routes was the northern route to Fairbanks, Alaska, where we delivered fighter planes like the P-39 Airacobra, and that's how I got Twyla, my protagonist, my American pilot, um, crosses paths with a Russian female pilot who she doesn't realize is just on injured duty. She's injured, and so she's a ferry pilot just to stay busy, right? To keep her flying. She can't fight in combat. But Twyla does not realize that. She just thinks she's a ferry pilot. She doesn't realize there's more to it, even though Marina tells her. But that idea of a female combat pilot in 1943, 44 was not possible in the West. That idea could not fit in the human brain, especially the male human brain. So, to make a long story short, that was how I sort of cracked the nut of the story I really wanted to tell, which was both stories: amazing American women ferry pilots and amazing Russian combat pilots. And so that's how if you, since most of you haven't read the book yet, I'm not going to say any more, but let's just say Twyla she is successful, and boy, does it hurt.
Yeah. That's amazing how you took so much research and made it into such an amazing story. It's such a resilient story. I loved it. I actually read both books.
Oh, thank you for that.
I wanted to read them before I interviewed you, and they're so amazing. I just love them.
Oh, that's very kind of. You're one of the first to read both. It's just so new. It's just coming out. So I'm so glad to hear that. It is it's it is a big story.
And so I read a little background on you, and you grew up on naval bases. Would you like to talk about your experience growing up on those?
Yeah, and there's not a lot of detail other than, yeah, the first three places I lived were Honolulu, there at the Navy base. And then we went from there to Kwajalein out in the Marshall Islands. My dad um, was about to get sort of transferred to carrier duty as a Navy pilot. And that didn't work out, depending on who you ask
Mhm.
why. That didn't work out anyway. They put him in charge of basically flight control around the islands. And then from there, they shifted him over to China Lake Naval Weapons Center, Echo Range out in the Mojave Desert. So we went from being on islands in the middle of nowhere to to a little Navy town in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by the Mojave Desert. And those were the first three places I lived. Mostly my memory is that aviation was a huge everyday occurrence. There were just airplanes overhead, jets, and Echo Range. I mean, that was a missile and bomb testing range. That was a tracking range, tracking center. There was a lot of activity from really from anybody that wanted to rent the real airspace out there. So and on any given day, you could see fighters chasing, orange painted drones. You would hear multiple sonic booms a day that would rattle the windows. But because that was where we grew up, we went to air shows. We got to see famous aviators, and it was just such a big impression as a child that aviation was just it was just something I was just saturated in, and I have always loved. It's just such an adventurous thing to me. And the story of aviation, which is so young,
Mhm.
it's barely over 100 years old, and it's fascinating to me. There aren't enough stories, and I there are a lot, but I love them anyway. Yeah, so that was just my young introduction was just around a lot of airplanes.
That's amazing. And did you enjoy drawing the illustrations for Twyla and the WarBirds?
Very much. Yeah, and those illustrations represent many years of sort of tinkering with images out of the story,
Mhm.
and it was kind of fun as I was putting the book together to realize that I actually have enough illustrations. I could put one at the beginning of each chapter, um, and that was really fun to do because I've lived some of these illustrations I've lived with for decades. I've had them with me because before I started writing Twyla as a novel, I wrote it as a really bad screenplay. And it turns out the story is just too big for my skills. My screenplay skills can't take that much story and try to stuff it into 2 hours or less. So I was always visualizing uh, this story, uh, it's an easy one to get excited about. It's very graphic that time, that era, very adventurous, and yes, I very much did like enjoy it. And then this is one of them, yeah, that ended up as the so I drew this on the canvas, and then my wife painted it, and then I digitized it in a illustrating program and just kind of cleaned it up and added some more detail. But yeah, I can't help myself.
That's amazing. You're one of the first authors that I've met and talked to that have made their own illustrations because some of the people in the writing community, they don't have the drawing skills, especially myself. So that's really amazing that you came up with this story and you also included your drawings in them.
I'm glad I could because it's for me they're part of the same. They're not one or the other for me. Yeah.
And do you have any advice for anybody that wants to get into cinematography if they're just starting out?
For cinematography, oh sure, absolutely. Well, it couldn't be easier to train your eyeball up now because everybody's pocket phone has a camera. But um, I would s- I would s- I wouldn't rely on that. It's not a great camera system, in spite of the marketing and advertising. I would get your hands on a whatever you can with a real lens that um, you can learn the functions and then just start telling stories and it study cinema. Why does a story work? Just break it down, start practicing. And it's in making all those, that effort and making all those mistakes and learning how to make something work as images connecting. One thing you will find is that the sound is as equal to, sometimes more important than the images. Um, and you're not going to probably hear a lot of cinematographers admit that, but the truth is, if as a audience member, when you're watching something, how long will you put up with bad sound,
Not long.
right? But you will put up with questionable images if the sound is good, because the sound is the road. It's the
Right.
path that goes through, and you're grounded by it. And so it's also where so much impressionism lives. And I would submit that good storytelling, well, actually all storytelling is impressionism. Um, and it when it's well done, it really it forces your brain to it your brain can't help but fire on those cylinders, right? We all share uh, the meaning of images and sounds, and when you can combine them in the right place, you're transported. Suddenly, you're not aware that you're sitting on a seat in the theater or on your lazy boy chair. You're just out of your body. I think that's magic. I think that's how you define magic.
Mhm.
Yeah. But anyway, just to answer your question, sorry, I do meander. Um, it's just practice. And nowadays it's very easy because you can shoot and edit for almost no cost. And you can start to figure out why things work and why they don't. Yep.
And do you think that you have another Twyla and the WarBirds story coming out anytime soon, or any future plans in writing anything else?
As a matter of fact, I am working on I am working on in the books there's young Twyla that Grandma Twyla is telling the story to her granddaughter. Well, in this next story, her granddaughter is now, I think, in her early 30s. And this next one would be science fiction. So Twyla has another granddaughter, Twyla has an adventure.
Exciting. And has any of your family or friends gotten to read your story at all, or any of them like an advocate for you pursuing this?
Yeah, in fact, I was really kind of at the final draft when the pandemic hit. And so when everybody went to, zooming with fans and friends and family, I started reading a chapter each day. Um, and that was so helpful. I could see the level of engagement. I could hear their questions and their comments, and and it helped me just do the final tune-up of the story. And yeah, everybody's been super supportive, super supportive. Yeah, I have a lot of fan family who are fans.
That's amazing. Is there anything else that you'd like to share about yourself? Any fun facts that your audience may not know about you?
Well, as I'm not famous at all, no one knows anything about me until now. Yeah, I can say that I'm also working on a feature film um, that's has some good traction. I'm very excited about, and it is in this world of World War II aviation, and it is kind of it is a war film. It's very suspenseful and intense. And as soon as there's some real concrete momentum, then I will, I'll share with the audience, as it were, the goings on. But yeah, it's pretty exciting. I've done a lot of illustrations for that as well, a lot of storyboards for it. I just keep pushing. I like telling stories, and I love. The other thing I would say is I'm a huge audiobook nut. I really got into that about 20 years ago, and I had the luck of being able to raise some funds and produce my own audiobooks as well. So, Twyla and the WarBirds audiobook is I hired an actor that I had worked with, and she was an amazing narrator. Flew over to England. We worked at a friend of hers was an engineer, fantastic engineer, and we worked for 2 weeks and recorded both books there. And that makes me just as excited as anything because I just love audiobooks, and I think a good narrator is also a magician. They blow me away. I can't tell you how many times I go out for a run, which is pretty painful, run for 3 miles, And most of it, I'm out of my body because I'm so sucked in to the narrator's voice and the story that's being told. To me, it takes the pain right out of running, which come on. How do you explain that? It's fantastic.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for talking to me today. It was so wonderful to meet you and get to learn more about you. And where can everybody follow you on social media if they want to keep following your story?
Yeah. Instagram and TikTok is I'm constantly uh, posting little reels for my the loves of my life. Uh, there are all these fantastic women in this book and in these books, and yeah, I'll just keep posting because and there's so many great people who have good feedback, and um, yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate that.
Welcome. You have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Bye bye.